In episode 7, it was quite clear where our hero got his tactics from, using a book from his past world, the teachings of Machiavelli's The Prince.
マキャベリの第8章で
How this man outside the normal realms of nobility rose to be the king. The seat of the king was suddenly placed upon him, with no prior experience, already living up to the title of a prince rather than a king. And for the majority of him being called the king, he never fully acknowledged himself as the king. But over the course of the war, he realized his position and what it feels like to wear the crown.
Without even realizing it, at some point I began conducting myself as the official ruler of the nation. I'm creating policy now by looking at the number of lives I can save, then subtracting the number we'd lose, and selecting a course of action that doesn't result in a negative.
A nation can either be a republic or a principality. It can either be new or old. The state he now governs was and still is an old hereditary state that is passed down through the generations, which is shown with Princess Lucia, who constantly reminds us of this, in part 1 and in part 2, that her family will remain in power. When it's decided that he will have multiple wives, her one condition is to keep the seat of power through her hereditary line, meaning her child will remain in power.
I have no intention of giving up the throne as first queen. Can you live with being second? If so, then I have no objection.
The state ran this way is easy to manage, and the people get very used to how they're being treated. The seat of power is a monarchy, shown with how the former king and Kazuya came to power, and will hold the power until they decide otherwise. But because of this, it was very easy to take over. Just kill the leader, like Alexander the Great did, and you're now the new ruler. The dukes and the noblemen knew this and wanted his head, to either place it upon the kingship of Carmine or Albert. Kazuya knows this better than anyone, and must decide he must become someone different to stay around long enough until the next king. All resistance must be met with cruel, swift, and firm actions, and any benefit he will give must be handled over time to quell the people, and also, he must keep his army ready at all times to defend, because he's a newcomer, and he can't rely on any outside help. At the time, all he had was the base army that listened to the former king. He can't rely on the outside help of Carmine, Walter, and Vargas until they come under his command. Kazuya will be the embodiment of this anime's Machiavelli. The prince must demonstrate his knowledge of his history. This is helped by having Hakuya as his aide, showing he knows all the downfalls of past rulers. The example here is when he talks about the Great War of China that unified the country. The prince must be ready for war. He must study every tactic. This was necessary to beat the dukes. The prince must know his land to keep the money and the people under control. He does this by having weekly shows and valuing their weird quirks. The prince must be purposeful, determined, unwavering. He must give the people arts, economics, and agriculture. This is shown with his nation and the Amazonians. He must use everyone that is purposeful or talented. He must own those who are prideful for their state. This is his recruitment of new talents, and him keeping the old lieutenant of the Amazonians even after they had to leave.
One last matter concerning General Margarita. We would like to have her remain in the kingdom.
Fortune must be dominated. The princes of Italy didn't fail because they lacked the power. They failed because they lacked inactiveness. Soma is constantly active. Have you ever seen him just sitting around the throne, or sleeping lazily in his bed, or having a court jester entertain him, or greedfully sitting and counting his money? He can't relax. He sold the treasury of the kingdom because they were useless. He destroyed half the crops of cotton because they were useless. He got rid of aides because they were useless as well. He's signing papers every day. He doesn't have time to relax. If he relaxes, that will be his demise. This is the brief summary of Machiavelli's teachings, and Kazuya tries to enact as many of these as he possibly can in the anime. They're not the perfect teachings of Machiavelli's The Prince, but they're close interpretations of what he could do with them. This is why, even though the art style doesn't seem that impressive, and the people he brings in don't seem all that talented, this is why how a realistic hero rebuilt the kingdom is good. Part 1. The first part is to be present. Kazuya is brought into this new world, summoned by the king of Elfried, King Albert, to then be handed over to the Empire as a form of financial compensation. The Empire probably assumed that the hero would fight, but still did not know exactly what the hero would do. The legend was about the hero sparking revolution, but no actual references of notes are found. The nation of Elfried is a poor but somewhat stable nation, with a king that makes foolish decisions but has a good heart. Kazuya, seeing that his only option is to live, he decides to secure his position here, rather than go to the Empire where he has even less knowledge or sway power. In Machiavelli, not being able to stay in the city is not a way to keep the city. He needs to be proactive to efficiently deal with the problem, and notice and contain the threat, like he does to stop potential revolutions, and to have less traitors. For example, he sways Halbert and his family to remain loyal soldiers instead of going to join Duke Carmine. In the second episode, he highlights the reason of fact-checking the finances to deal with embezzlements and indicating wasted funds. Ultimately, you see this play back further into the chapter when they find out the corrupted nobles, taking away their lands, and then finally killing them. To win, he needs to be active, lucky, and note out the key point issues the people have, as well as then regulate and control. The people are hungry and know nothing about the new king, so he calls out to them. He hires new people in front of them to let everyone see what kind of king he is, to show how he deals with the average person, his subjects. He does a cooking show where he puts on new dishes to show them what type of foods they should be eating. He does this regularly, with all types of different foods they have not yet seen. Why is this? Because these foods come from parts of the world they're not at yet. So they have to now put these crops into work and grow them here. Here he's as hands-on as it gets. He can't do this once or twice. He has to be persistent. He has to have his presence known. If he neglects his duty, he will eventually be overthrown. After someone became the king, he didn't follow the mistakes of Louis XII and going off to go get more power from other nations. He first built up rapport with the princess and the people, which was amazing. Princess Lucia here thought that the throne was being usurped and was ready to go fight. If Soma was greedy and took it by force, or went off to go build alliances with other nations very quickly, he would have died very quickly. Carmine, Vargas, Walters, anyone would have killed him. Part 2 says not to be neutral. He can't be indecisive. It shows incompetence and weakness. If two nations are fighting, we say the smart thing to do is just not get involved, but both nations will take notice of this, making you less trustworthy in the future to both of them, which will spell your demise from the victor and the revenge from the loser. The people will remember your position and keep that in mind. The winner wouldn't want a friend that can turn their back on them, and the loser will feel very content because you could have helped them in their time of need. You can, however, hold off on your decision if you can get a strategic advantage. Soma fights two of the dukes and the Amazonians. He kills the Amazonian leader, takes Vargas out of his position and unable to leave the nation, and fakes Carmine's death because he was a double agent working with the former king. The prince would force Kazuya here to kill Vargas and his children too, but he simply takes away their power and stops Carla's potential rage by allowing her to kill him. So, not a perfect demonstration of the book, but not bad. Part 3, Be Man and the Beast. A good leader must strive for peace, but be able to wage war. The man knows laws and will go about it in an orderly fashion, but the beast will want it by force. By Part 2, this was well aware. A civilized man knows the law and tries to keep disputes within the law, but law does not always work in our favor, so you must be ready to wage war and fight. Kazuya's dispute with the Prince Julian shows this pretty well. He has to give back the territory even though Amadonia started the war. Using a loophole in the Empire's treaty, the prince is able to get around the Empire and force Soma to give back the land. But in turn, the Empire changed their interpretation of the ruling to prevent other countries from doing the same thing and starting other wars. So Soma, instead of fighting the Empire, waited for the people of Amadonia to revolt on their own and then ask for their aid, as well as when the nobles were going to sell off information behind his back. By normal means, he couldn't just straight off kill them. He has to wait till he got enough evidence and it was known public that they were traitors. Then he could kill them and then take off their land. Even if King Albert or King Carmine would have known this, they couldn't outright just kill the nobles. It would look bad in front of the people. They could work around it and even hire mercenaries to stop them, so he had to wait until the right opportunity. Part 4, Destroy, Do Not Wound. There once was a famous Napoleon space Hitler who genocided an entire planet of people. Those few met up with another party, and the two teamed up to go kill the monster. This was the story of Frieza, and we know this was his biggest mistake. If he would have just finished off the remaining few survivors, instead of trying to keep them around as a pet, they wouldn't have sought for revenge. This is the case of Prince Julian. His usurp would have happened eventually. After achieving victory, you must be ready to heal. After wounding Armadonia, he rested and gave the people art, economics, and agricultural freedom. His mistake here was letting the prince go off to the Empire. The Empire, if greedy, could have used this to wage war and take Amadonia for themselves. Kazuya got lucky. If he would destroy them entirely, he could have taken their army and have been ready enough to fight the Empire. The prince in Amadonia was going to lose his power no matter what he did. His family has repeatedly hurt the people. They cannot be trusted, and the moment Soma gave them freedom, the people knew what a better life was. If not Soma, the Empire, or another outside nation, the people would have just simply made it a republic city. Part 5. Acquire when you can, and do not take the land if you can't maintain it. One problem with the shortage was the overproduction of cotton, with the lower demand and market price, the hoarding of money from the noblemen and officials, the lack of knowledge of the land, and poor trade. After taking Amadonia, he couldn't financially take the people on, not financially yet, nor could he fight the Empire. So he waited till it was possible to do so. When you try to keep a promise or do something but you fail to do so, the people will have a negative opinion about you. People love it when other people fail. In episode 7, faced with pushback over the myth passed down through generations of people, he didn't force them to just move aside or cancel the construction in front of his people, but he listened to their concerns and then simply moved the land and construction somewhere else, while also educating the people so this wouldn't happen in their next generation. Hopefully, the next generation of people wouldn't fall victim to a myth. Simply put, know your limits. Know what you can do and what you can't do, and don't overpromise something you can't do. Part 6. Never bring other people to power. Acquire power yourself, not by the help of others. This is mainly highlighted in Amadonia, but the prince again. Kazuya taunts him, but at the same time giving him information. Kazuya put in many sleepless hours to raise funds to save himself, and to gain the kingdom more money, and to get the respect of his people. He had to get the respect of Euphorius and the dukes through his own hard work. Prince of Amadonia came to power due to his bloodline, and the same for his forefathers. And then after he lost his kingdom, he runs to the Empire to give it back to him. Afterwards, he went back to the teachings of his fathers and started to blame the people of Elfrin and taxing the people and killing citizens. Now this would have worked before, but after the people have a taste of freedom and know that another power close by could easily take their land, they've had enough of it. So the problem here was allowing a foreign party to set up colonies and win the favor of the people. Here they'll want to weaken any outside threats, and they will kill off any foreign allies to prevent you from getting power back in your own land. So the mistake was ever letting them set foot into their borders and setting up camps. But it's not fully the same thing because there wasn't outside parties except for the Empire and the people of the North, who we don't even get to see, that do anything about this. So this one's not fully realized in the anime. If you bring in new power, they can eventually take over is the point though, which is made clear with Kazuya asking the Empire to remove the prince. He has no army. By bringing the Empire, he gives them full decision-making power over them. In this case, you can say the Empire is acting in this part. In this position, the Empire has all the power in the room with Elthian. Luckily, Soma lucks out here by not being antagonist to the Empire, otherwise he would have died. This can also be looked at as the Dukes all having their own military forces under their own command, while still being under Elfdian, meaning Soma would have to ask them really nicely every time to use their own army, and there would be too many voices in the chain of command. Part 7. Be feared or loved. Essentially, it comes down to two styles of leading. Should you be feared or should you be loved? If you're loved, you'll be limited to tactics that you can use in war. Essentially put, you can't go outside this box of military tactics to use, and your men might love you, but they'll take your orders slightly less serious, as well as they're more likely to revolt. Essentially put, in the first season, his military is new to him. Sure, they respect some of his new policies, but they would rather go work for Lord Carmen or Duke Carmen. So he makes them fear him a little bit. He doesn't go all out. He can only show this with one soldier. That one soldier got his ass beat by his father. Now, that soldier was going out of line and talking about betraying his kingdom and running off to go to Duke Carmine. He was made an example of, essentially. But this was not shown to the full extent of what it could have been. Now, because he's loved, he's limited to a lot of tactics, because he wouldn't want his soldiers to have a bad reputation about him. And at some point in time, wars had a certain rule, like you couldn't use mustard gas, or you can't use nukes, essentially. That's essentially what being loved is. You can't use some form. In his teachings, to be feared, you have to be cruel, but at the same time stable. The only example that Kazuya has is in episode 7 in the second season of killing all the nobles that were going to betray him. He doesn't really have too much of the fear package. They did kill the ruler of Amadonian, but by Machiavelli standards, that's still not fully enough. Conclusion, it's a 2.5. Like, the journey wasn't hard enough, essentially. The show is smart, but doesn't go all out, wanting to let the viewer understand what's being said, but not go into full intellectual discussions. This is a show with the constant over-explanation type, but doesn't have a lot of intellectual people in the room when he does it. There's only a few. Also, the show isn't that accurate. Like, the people speak quite modern when you say for the given time period, with no accents. We understand that this is a different world, and they have a different set of rules in the world, but it shouldn't be that different to where the speech of everyone speaking the same language. You would think a diverse group of people would have different languages, but that's not the case in this world. They all speak the same. It did a good job of the characters, with doing what that time I got reincarnated as a slime did, with characters doing their jobs in the background, and not constantly around the main lead. Like, if a person's job is to make sandwiches, why the hell are they in the financial room doing paperwork? Like, other shows make you have to put up with these useless characters, and then justify it later saying that they couldn't do this job without them. This has been happening more recently in, say, isekais, but it's not exclusive to the genre. A lot of characters do this. Characters are still not outstanding though, is what I will say. It's still full of the yes man harem archetype, of them just following whatever he says and him being surrounded by a harem. Any males that oppose him die too quickly. The other males are incompetent. Still, I don't like this critique that his superpower is having Japanese education and reading some Machiavelli principles. But part of this is true, is what I will say. Each principle has a bit of the example, but them not fully going into the teachings of Machiavelli's The Prince. This would be their brief, small interpretation of the anime Machiavelli. I know everyone thinks of Machiavelli's principles be the most cruel things on earth, or, like all this cruel stuff, but in all honesty, it's not that much cruel. Some of it does seem quite reasonable, but I will say it doesn't go fully into the Machiavelli archetype. But him fixing the starvation problem being some kind of common sense solution is not true. People, when hungry, will force themselves to eat all types of food. But have you noticed that people still go hungry? Why is that? I can't exactly answer that, because that has been a question that's been haunting man since the beginning of time. All you can do is make your situation a little bit better, and learn a little bit more knowledge about the land. So that comes in the question about how many people here knew you could eat tree bark. I bet some of you did, but I could see more of you saying, yeah, you can eat more insects than tree bark. Also, most insects in this country are the size of humans, so it's a little bit harder to kill them. You wouldn't know to eat bark right away unless you had experience with being an outdoorsman. Over time, people get more used to eating the meals they are accustomed to in their country, and the knowledge like this of eating bark, insects, and other foreign products can be a little bit lost. So now let's talk about the foreign products. The foreign products that are abundant are the foreign products that they typically try to eat. Still, they have to get a shipment of these foreign products from elsewhere. Them eating octopus, they got lucky because it's abundantly here. Still, the idea of this being some type of common sense is just really wrong. Starvation is still a problem to this day, and we have the knowledge. Like, you're not just gonna simply get rid of the problem. The second being that the realism isn't good. There isn't any opposition to his power, not enough backstabbing, but by now there won't be any. Like, there isn't any opposition to his power, there's not enough backstabbing being taken place, and by now there won't be any. The reason being is because the old king and queen killed off all their opposition in the country, with having George Carmen working for them essentially, and have all the opposition join him so Soma could just all together kill everyone there, or simply get the information to kill them later, making Soma's job a lot easier. Still, the show is not as witty as it needs to be, and it's too much of the isekai harem genre and less of the big brain dialogue scenes that you kind of would want, with dialogue being dumbed down, with little resistance. This anime needs a serious upgrade in dialogue. It needs to be around the level of Spice and Wolf and Katanagari, with it currently being the level at the Mayo Hero. The reason I use this example is because it only has one character with a much higher education level running the entirety of the story. If they can introduce new characters that can actually challenge Soma's rule, then this show would be a lot better. And like I said earlier, the show needs to have the characters have some type of accent to them. But it's too late for that. 2.5.